Oh, there we go. So I welcome you all to Faith-Filled Exploration School Board Success with Gayle Denny, the Executive Director Emeritus of the ELEA and personal friend of mine, and I'm so glad that you're here. And I will turn it over to you and let you take it away.
Thank you, Corey, and thank you everyone for being on the webinar today. I'm glad I could help out. I'm a pinch hitter. The presenter that was supposed to do the recording has some health issues and asked me if I would fill in, and I'm happy to be able to do that. It also means that I may not be quite as prepared as the original presenter would have been, but I think we'll get through this just fine. So we're talking today about school board success. And whenever I think of what makes a process or an organization work well, I always think of the disasters that I've seen over the years that didn't work well. And when I think about boards, the one that comes to my mind, and they'll stay unnamed, but I will say they're in the Pacific Northwest. And they called me, this is probably 7 or 8 years ago, and said, we really need some help sorting out our board and our staff and our pastor and our council. No one's getting along. There's just huge dysfunction. And the scenario was that the board was made up of teachers. So teachers were voting on their own salaries and budget. And so there were teachers on the board. There were no term limits for any of the board members. Some of them had been on for the 30 years that the preschool had been in existence. There were really no identifiable measurements of success. You know, if there was a dollar left in the budget at the end of the year, they figured that was good. And there was just very little in the way of process, and there was very little in the way of training. And the people on the board, really, the biggest problem was they saw ownership and forgot that they were a ministry of the church. And that the church, now, Linda, I know in your case, you're separately incorporated, correct? Or you're back to under the auspices of the church. Okay. I know for a time you were, and there are some of those scenarios where the school might be a separate corporation or a sub corporation, and there's a little bit more autonomy. But in most cases, the school is a direct ministry of the church, and the church is responsible for the organization and structure and operation of the school ultimately. And in this case, where we had so much dysfunction, the board did not really understand that. They felt that they were autonomous, and they couldn't figure out why the pastor was butting her nose into things and why the church council president wanted accountability, because they saw it as theirs. So that's just an example of like, wow, these people really needed help, and we really need to get them on track and help them understand the proper function of a board. So in most cases, it's a ministry of the church, and in most cases, there needs to be some kind of measure of success. So with that said, let me share my PowerPoint. Okay. And Corey can always tell you how to get a hold of me, but you will see my email address there if anybody would like to have that. You're more than welcome. Okay. Let's see. Corey, you might need your help here. There we go. Okay, got it. Board success. So how would you define a successful board? And there's a few things here that just kind of randomly throwing out ideas. But for those of you participating, Shannon, how would you describe a successful board?
I think the biggest thing is communication, willingness to discuss different ideas and not just go in with your mind made up.
Linda, you have any thoughts on that?
Sorry, I had to unmute.
That's all right.
finding a way to get everybody to come to a meeting, that seems to be my hardest thing.
How big
Yeah.
a board do you have?
Right now I only have 5. We have 3 church members and 2 parents.
Okay.
So I usually do our board meetings at Applebee's because then everybody will come.
I thought you were going to say you serve drinks or something.
Well, people
They can
do.
order drinks at Applebee's.
And then when I do it at Applebee's, everybody comes.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, it is a challenge working with volunteers. So getting them together initially, I mean, that's huge. That's a huge thing. So some things that we jotted down here, all working towards a common goal. So you don't have factions with. Now tell me about the parents. Are the parents just advisory members? Are they voting members? Do they rotate on a shorter term than a church member? What does that look like?
Yep. Parents are on a 1-year term, and they do have a vote. They are voting members.
Okay. Okay. All right.
And I
There's
usually
mixed,
pick and choose who I want.
okay. There are mixed feelings about that, I think, within the structure of our school organizations. Some feel that parents have their own agenda that pertains to their own child or their own children. Others feel that that's a positive, not a negative. There's a lot of ways to look at it, but I think the 1-year term is probably appropriate. Or not on, if they have 4 kids, they're not going to be on for the next 12 years. And do you both have term limits on your board members? For the
Yep.
other board members?
Yeah, it's 2 years for church members.
Yeah, okay.
Ours is 2 years as well, but you can do 2 terms back to back.
Okay. So working towards a common goal, letting the administrator or the director lead and be supportive, knowing their role, being able to help to move the organization forward, setting goals and achieving them, and being an active participant in the advancement of the school or the center. Any other things that come to your minds, or Corey, that you would add about defining a successful board?
Sorry, I too have challenges with unmuting, I guess.
That's okay.
I put a few things, a short list that I'd put together this morning and sent out as a reminder for this webinar, but so I put them in the chat there. But one thing that really comes to mind is that a school board really understand their specific roles and how their roles play actively in the congregation and the council, just that whole understanding of the entire ministry, school and church together. I think I see problems arise when the school board, like you said, is really acting so autonomously and there isn't good communication with the council. And maybe there's not even governance and structure that indicates that that's necessary. And it is so vital to shared ministry.
I think one of the most important pieces of paper that can be given to board members is an organizational chart that shows church council at the top and then pastors and staff and where everyone fits together. And we kind of make this assumption that nowadays most churches have something like that in place, but it isn't necessarily true, or it hasn't been updated in 20 years and the information isn't correct. Yeah, thanks for this list, Corey, so that you're saying you're actively engaged and contribute positively. We've all probably been on or know of boards where people want to get on a board because they don't like the way something's being run and they think they are going to come in and change it. I have the fortunate or unfortunate, depending on how you look at it, role of being the president of my neighborhood homeowners association board. And over the years, I didn't choose to be president. The previous president just suddenly quit and I was vice president. And that's the downside to vice presidency. You kind of end up in the role whether you want to be there or not.
Uh-oh. We may have lost Gail for a second.
Yeah, everything froze for me.
Yeah, she was frozen and then it was, I could still hear her talking and then it was like, oh, and now she's back.
I lost my connection. I really apologize. I don't know quite what happened. So I'm not quite sure where I was, other than to say we've had people come on this homeowners board over the years that wanted to change everything because they're not happy. And then they get on and they realize very soon that they don't have near the power or the autonomy that they think they do, and they end up leaving. And so Linda, your struggle of getting people to a meeting is when there's nothing particularly controversial going on, they're not as engaged in just the everyday things. Unfortunately, it's the controversy that sometimes gets them motivated. All right, we're going to go back to sharing and see if this works. Okay. All right, so roles. The school board must have a well-defined description of their role in relationship to the school faculty and staff, and this is part of what we're talking about, and the administration and the church leadership. And that's why those kinds of things are very important. I really recommend some onboarding for new board members. Outside of just throwing them into their first meeting, getting together, maybe depending on the relationship with the church staff, but maybe with the church somebody from church council, maybe the president of your school board, maybe the pastor, maybe you, just a short half hour with the new board members, kind of helping them understand those roles. And Corey, that's part of what you're talking about too, is just how do we all fit together and how do we all work for the greater good? And what are we allowed to, what authority do we have and what authority don't we have? So is your board a working board, a policy-based governance board, or a mix? And boy, this is always, Linda, you probably remember back in the days with our ELEA board where we said, well, we're a working board because we can't afford to hire enough staff. So the board has to do the work. But we all know how that goes. I mean, you can sit in a meeting and all take on roles and decide that when you get out of the meeting setting, you're going to do these pieces of work. But the reality is then that your life takes over, your other responsibilities, it doesn't always get done. So how does that work with your school boards, with the two of you that are on? Are they considered a working board? And if so, does the work get done? Are they policy-based?
My board is a mix for sure. Right now we haven't even had a board meeting since the spring. I feel terrible, but I've just been too busy. I'm just doing too much right now. And I don't really have a strong board president, so it's all me. During COVID is when our board had to really work hard because of policies and, having to, I needed, in order to reinforce some of the policies that were getting ignored, not ignored, but we had some issues, as a lot of people did during COVID, and I had to bring the board in to back me up in a couple of occasions. But since then, we haven't really had any other than, voting on any tuition changes or policy changes, stuff like that.
Sure.
It's mainly me,
Just nothing controversial enough to motivate them to,
Right.
to set up a meeting. How about you, Shannon? What's the current model for your board?
Yeah, I think we're probably a mix too. We meet monthly. So we meet often. Of course I say that, but we're skipping January this year. But we meet often. I like Linda, I think a lot of the work kind of falls to me, like I will come up with a suggestion or that kind of stuff, and I'm the one executing it. Not that my board wouldn't help, but a lot of all my board is made up of church members, and all but one of them are retired. So while they're helpful in helping to make decisions like tuition raises and pay rates and that kind of stuff, the day-to-day, I don't know, kind of preschool stuff, unless there's really a problem, they're probably a little more out of the loop.
And is that working for you? I mean, they give you
Yeah,
more
I mean,
authority.
honestly, it works fine. We've had years where we've had board members that are a little bit more invested, and I'd say it's good and bad. We definitely had an older gentleman that was the best advocate our program has ever seen as far as advocating for us to the church, which was really lovely. But he also came from being, oh shoot, what was it he did for work? He was some kind of architect for the government where everything had a, you know, this step, then this step, then this step. And it was just a very different structure of how you do things than it is at a preschool. So while he was a wonderful advocate for our program, our board meetings that are now like 45 minutes used to be over 2 hours long. And we're doing that monthly. So it's just getting to understand, like, you know, he didn't understand why we weren't licensed with the state. Well, it's because we're a part-time program. We're not here enough hours in the day. And we'd have to change the way we do a lot of things. And so some of those things, he just was more on the business side and didn't have the understanding. And then sometimes we have retired teachers, and that works out great because they've been dealt with similar issues. So
Again, okay.
It's always interesting. And then sometimes you get men that are on the board, not to disparage any men, but they're just, I don't know, maybe they just get tagged by the church, you know, committee to be a part of it and aren't really, they don't know what they're supposed to do.
Yeah. And they maybe were not primary caregivers for their own children or what, so yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, I'd say the one thing is trying to get some, it's hard because people that are younger are working and they have kids at home and they're busier. So part of it is we end up with a lot of retirees because they have the time, which is great, but they're also so far removed from dealing with kids at home or small children that sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect there.
Mhm.
That can be a little challenging.
Yeah, so the policy of having a parent representative on the board can help with some diversity on that. And as I said, I don't have a strong feeling about parents. Sometimes it works out well, sometimes it doesn't. But it is something that certainly you could try if your board were willing, or in the church were willing to change that model. So let's talk about boards being able to make decisions, and the answer to that really is just when they're in session. And I found that with many boards, this is a common problem. You don't want any lone rangers, and you don't want parking lot meetings. You know, the meeting after the meeting where the two of them are out in the parking lot dissing everything that just happened during a meeting. Board members really need to understand that when they're not in session, they need to be careful to not represent the board unless the board has given that member a specific task to do or a specific piece of work. And if there are concerns about the principal or the director that are brought to the board, the director or principal should be made aware of that, so you don't have this blindsided surprise, you know, that comes down after the line, down the line after the discussions have taken place. Have any of you had problems with this, with board members kind of doing their own thing, or a couple of them not making decisions or having discussions that aren't really relative to the whole board?
We had two family members on our board back when our board was much larger. And like, I want to say it was a grandma and a mother. I can't remember exactly what the relationship was, but together they caused so much trouble. And so now we have a rule that only one, you can't have two family members on the board together.
Ah, good rule.
Yeah, that I couldn't believe the trouble they caused. This was like 20 years ago, but
Yeah.
they were church members. And oh my word, I mean, they just took the ball and ran.
Yeah, they wanted to be in charge. How about you, Shannon?
Yeah, and I think not necessarily making decisions, but I've definitely heard through the grapevine about different conversations that are even the same board member, this former board member kind of still pops up, and I'll hear about, well, he said he's not even on the board anymore. Like, and I mean, not that he's not speaking ill of our program, so I know it could be much worse than that. But yeah, it's something I kind of like to put the kibosh on too. If it's important, I need to be aware. If it's not important, then we kind of rely on our current board members. If they hear rumors or things in the church, that they're responsible for helping us put a stop to that.
Yeah, good. And we're going to talk about kind of the onboarding in a minute here, but that becomes part of it, is helping the board members really understand that they what they can and can't do, and the kinds of discussions and decisions that are appropriate within the structure of the board, and what's not appropriate outside. So let's look at common vision for the future. Sometimes the boards just don't look at the long term. They're just kind of putting in their time. Like Linda, you were saying, they'll show up, they'll vote for the budget, or and Shannon, you mentioned too, just kind of the simple things that they're willing to do. But it is not as common to have school board members that just really want to advance the program and really be advocates for the program. And I mean, ideally, if you could create the perfect board member, they'd be doing both. So they need to be looking at things like, where are you headed as a school or a center? Is this just maintain day to day? And COVID threw such a wrench in everything. I think everybody's just recovering and trying to get back to some normalcy. But having a well-defined vision for the future and making sure the board members are really part of that. So some kind of strategic planning, goal setting processes could be really important. And Linda, it might be a way to get them a little more engaged too, is once a year making it kind of more of you can call it a retreat, serve food and drinks, and they might show, but something where instead of just dealing with the day-to-day business, they're looking ahead and doing some planning and some goal setting. And if the board, does the board really know what the third point there? If there is a well-defined vision for the future, does the school board know it? And does it drive the decisions that are being made to move forward? A lot of times, and like you mentioned, Shannon, you've got like a guy who he means well, he wants to represent the church, he wants to be on the board, but he doesn't really even know how to do this. So finding ways to get people connected so they're doing more than just showing up for a meeting and rubber stamping a budget that's presented, or not getting hung up on, like, what color do we paint the bathrooms or something, because that can eat up a 3-hour discussion in a meeting, as we all know. So do you currently, either one of you, have any strategic planning or goal setting processes in place that involve the board, maybe the board and the staff?
I don't currently have that. I try to do, I remember you came here and did a SWOT analysis thing, and I do that with my board every like 5 years or so, because I really liked that process. But we are very mission focused. So we do talk about the mission of the school and the mission of the church, and how do they match and how do they align. And because the chapel school is kind of fueling the Sunday chapel experience that the church is having, those things are talked about a lot more now.
Yeah, I'd say we're definitely really good as a staff about setting goals and things we want to improve in our program. The board, it's kind of like Linda's, we're a little more focused on building a stronger relationship between the church and the preschool, and remembering that we're a mission of the church. So we should be treated as a mission of the church and not a tenant that's here a few mornings a week.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, just absolutely. That I agree with you on the thumbs up is it goes both ways. It's having the school understand that they are under the auspices of the church, and it's having the church understand that this is their ministry. Just like the, Sunday school and vacation Bible school and choir and the quilter ladies and all those, you have just, the difference is you're bringing in money and you're serving the population in your community. But
And
a lot of
another
times,
thing-
right, you do become relegated to being treated like a tenant. I'm sorry, Linda.
Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt you. But I've been really focused on, for the past several years, just elevating the role of our weekday families in the minds of the church, because there was a real disconnect between families that came on Sunday and families that were here during the week. And what I've really been working hard on, and we're really getting somewhere now, is getting the church to see these families as equally important. And like, weekday families are still church families. Sunday families are church families. We are all the same.
Yeah.
And that's really getting the best results on our end.
Good. I thank you for saying that and for bringing that up. One of my things that I've quoted for years is from Pastor Bill Hurst, who used to be on our ELEA national board, and he for years was the pastor at First Lutheran Church in Torrance, California, which had early childhood and elementary and two good-sized schools. And I think that Bill, to me, said it the best when he would say, if someone in the church says, well, why are we spending all this time and all this money? I mean, these people aren't even members. And he would say, they are members. Just because they're not here in church on Sunday morning, they're on campus. These parents are bringing and picking up their kids. They're on campus twice a day. They're putting more money in the church coffers than most everybody sitting in the pew on Sunday morning is. They're more engaged. They're more aware of what's going on the campus. They are members. Just because they don't, and this is back, he said this enough years ago. He said, just because they don't have a card in the Rolodex in the church office doesn't mean they're not members. They're just a different kind of member. And I think that's what you're saying, Linda, too, is trying to help the church understand these aren't just random people coming in. They are part of the life of the community. If they didn't want to be, most of them would probably find a secular school or take their kids to, VBK that's part of the public school and in a public school setting. I mean, most of the parents do want to be engaged in that kind of a setting where they wouldn't have chosen a church program. So thanks for sharing that. Okay, let's look at onboarding for a minute. Our time just goes so fast, doesn't it? So finding a systematic way to ensure that board members are ready for the role they're going to assume. And so this is what I was talking about, is having some kind of intentional training, so they're not just sort of thrown into the mix with their own perceptions or misperceptions of what board service really looks like, because they may have served on, other boards and committees in other walks of life, and they may be coming into this setting thinking it's going to operate the same way, kind of like your guy that you were referring to, Shannon. And so they need to really understand. And I think it's important to put together kind of a format that works for you. Decide who's going to lead the training of the board. And it might be you as administrator, but it might be the current, obviously, if it could be the current board chair, if you have a strong chair, that's the perfect person. It should be maybe a team so that they're getting a little bit of perspective. And information that needs to be shared. I think just even the logistics initially, make sure they understand the term limits, the meeting requirements. Like if you miss more than 2 meetings, you're off the board. Linda, maybe that's something you have to implement. Schedule regularly scheduled meetings. And then if you miss 2, you're gone. I mean, obviously, unless you know, had major surgery or something happened. I mean, we all have emergencies, but the meeting schedule, you know, pick a day of the month that works and just stick with it. Often you'll get someone will say, can we change the day of the meeting? This isn't working for me. And then about the time you do it, what happens? They get off the board, somebody else comes on. You know, I've just found with boards, it's best to just pick a date that works for the majority of people and then stick with it. The responsibilities of various offices. What does it mean to be the secretary of the school board? Are they going to be signing a lot of documents? Is it just a title to have? How about, is there a treasurer? Does the treasurer work with the staff and the church treasurer for accountability and financial processes? What does that mean? And then my favorite, of course, is the organizational chart. Corey can tell you, well, Linda can too, you've both known me a long time. The history, I'm kind of into the history of things. And sometimes people go, yeah, well, that's the way it used to be. We don't care about that anymore. And I think there's a fine line. I think it is important to understand the history of the school, the relationship with the church. You don't have to get into all the weeds with this, but I think new board members need to have an overview of that. And if there's been some major changes, you know, I'm thinking of years ago when I was an early childhood director, and this kind of addresses the thing about parents' perception of people in the program as well. We served 12-month-olds, we did toddlers and that, but we didn't have an infant room. And I was getting so many requests for infants, and I was losing some families because they'd have a new baby and they didn't want to take the kids to two different places. They didn't want to keep the 4-year-old with us and find a place for the infant. So I proposed that we repurpose some space and open an infant room. And oh gosh, got all kinds of interesting feedback. And this was many years ago. But there were actually, I thought it was a dark age comment where a couple of folks said, well, we shouldn't be encouraging moms to go back to work when they have babies. So we shouldn't offer an infant room. I go, they're going back to work whether there's a place for the kid or not. Let's make a safe place for this child. So you learn all kinds of interesting nuances about what people in the congregation think. But that was something that then when new people would come on the board, you know, years later, where new folks came into the church and they maybe didn't know that history, that we didn't serve, because they'll say, well, we don't really make any money on infants, because you really don't. You have to have such a high ratio of staff. It's really hard to make any money. It's pretty much a break even. But what it does is give you access to that whole family. And so explaining to them that, well, we didn't have infants and that's what it looked like, and now we do. Just those pieces of history that might be unique to your school. And Linda, in your case, you've gone kind of all through a lot of changes over the years, and they don't need, you know, a 3-hour history lesson, but just to touch on some of those changes can be helpful. What else do you think new board members need to know? Corey, what do you talk to people with board issues all the time? I'm sure these days.
Yeah. And one thing that, you know, I think is really helpful is to give new board members some of the minutes that leading up, you know, even 6 months of board meeting minutes for them to just look through and ask questions about, so they can kind of get up to speed on any things that have been discussed where motion hasn't been taken. You know, it simplifies and reduces the time that it takes to kind of explain the history of things when they've got a little bit of the background. And, you know, making available all of those documents that we talked about, you know, having those easily accessible, the organizational chart, the roles and responsibilities, any of those standard things. If you already have a standard meeting time and meeting schedule, having that in a written format or a digital document that you can share so that they can refer back to those things, I think is really helpful.
Good. Linda, I'm guessing what you were saying just a minute ago to Jen was maybe you don't have written minutes. Is that what you were saying?
No, I was saying that the parent who was our secretary last year never gave me the minutes, and now she's.
Yeah. I knew it had something to do with minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
And I didn't
minutes are
realize
really,
that till just now. Like as we're
Yeah.
talking about, it's like I never got those minutes from Amanda.
yeah, I mean, minutes are really important. It's how you go back and say, to the point where, as Corey and Linda both know, with our ELEA National Board, you know, years ago, I had a volunteer secretary on the board that would take minutes, except she wouldn't. She'd be looking at pictures of her grandkids on her computer and, you know, doing things. So that's when I started bringing in staff to take minutes so that the board members could concentrate on the conversation. Now, on a school board that only meets for 45 minutes, is that important? I don't know, maybe. If there's something really big to discuss or controversial, it might not be a bad idea to just have some neutral person come in and take minutes objectively, so that you've got a good record of the conversation. I don't know that that's always important, but it's certainly something to think about.
Yeah, that's what Jen and I were just saying. Jen is also she's just joined the church in this last year. And so, you know, I said, well, it's not really appropriate for you to be on the board because you're a staff member, but maybe you could come in as that
Just
person
to be a
take
minute
the
taker.
minute. And that
Yeah,
way
I
you feel
agree.
involved and active on the board and getting a good understanding of what's happening.
Yeah, I'm not for staff being voting members, but I certainly think it's fine for them to be there and know what's going on. And that might be a really great role, is to have her take minutes. Okay,
I'll
I'm sorry.
also share quickly, if you're doing any of your board meetings over Zoom, there's some really good AI software that allows the AI software will know who's in the room and it will know who's saying what, and it does kind of a play-by-play with a recording, and then it gives you a summary, which can be really helpful if you find yourself needing to take notes and be really present and engaged in the conversation. I've found it to be really, really accurate. It takes you do have to go through it and kind of, sometimes you'll have to fix names or kind of fix side conversation, like, oh, I don't need that in my summary. For some reason we talked about somebody just bought a new house, at an odd time. So you take that out. But for the most part, it's really accurate.
Great, thanks for sharing that. Okay, let's just move on, and a little section here on collaborating and communicating. And Shannon, this is part of what you were talking about initially, is that what's important to you is that everybody's communicating. The open communication is really important. The director or principal needs to be able to have continual communication with the board. So the relationship between the administrator and the board president should be pretty strong, to where they can have conversations and you're not necessarily having to wait for a meeting if there's something you want to say, get this on the agenda. I mean, ideally, the board chair should be setting the agenda, but we all know who really ends up setting the agenda. It's usually the administrator, but if you can work together on that. Meeting with the board president more than the full board might help with that, with building collaboration and working together and setting agendas. Make sure you give proper time for discussion. If you know something's going to eat up majority of the meeting, try to get the other things out of the way first and put that in. And it's a two-way street. So as administrators, we have to be willing to really communicate effectively with the board, as well as expecting them to communicate back with us. And then it's important to remember that some discussions are to remain privileged between the board and the director. You don't want to have some really personal conversation or privileged conversation, or maybe it's about a family in the center, whatever, and then hear about it from someone in church. So that's part of the onboarding with your board too, is making sure they understand that they can only operate as a board member when they're as part of the board, or have been given authority from the rest of the board to do a specific task, but also that they are not to share that information, that there's sensitive information. And even with when you're in executive session and there's no outsiders allowed on a discussion, those people shouldn't even go home and tell their spouses or family really what takes place. A lot of people don't understand that whole confidentiality. So that's kind of important to convey. We're going to kind of zip through the rest of this because I know we have another piece coming before the end of of our time. So let's look at building relationships. Getting to know one another helps in making sure that collaboration occurs. And this is part of this whole having a training, maybe a retreat. Sometimes just getting to know one another on a personal level helps you understand why people take the stance they do in meetings. It can build stronger relationships. The boards work together on important issues, and the better the relationship, the easier it is to be open when making decisions that allow the school to move forward. So I guess I can't really emphasize that enough, this whole building relationship. I know a lot of times you just want to get in the meeting, do what you have to do, go home and be done with it. But I have found when I'm willing to take the time to really get to know people and have a more of a retreat, social time, maybe social time after the meeting. I mean, I don't think your Applebee's thing is a bad idea, Linda. I mean, if it works, and then hang and say, okay, the meeting, when the meeting's adjourned, if you want to stay and, you know, have another drink or another munchie, let's just get to know each other a bit more. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, as long as once you're not in session, you're not discussing critical school business, particularly sensitive information. And then being present in the school or center. And this is something that Mike Rotman, who had put together some of this information, Mike really feels strongly about, and I think he does an excellent job at this, is getting board members to be present within the school and being approachable. So when there is an event, you know, the board members should be there in support of the school event. It allows families to see the board as approachable and know that they're working for the best interest of the overall ministry. And then they won't be perceived as only operating behind closed doors. So what are some ways that your boards, Linda and Shannon, are either present now in that kind of way, or you wish they would be present?
Well, we had a couple board members attend our Christmas program. One of them decorated her car for trunk or treat at Halloween and was out there in costume. We try to invite our board members to our ice cream social at the beginning of the summer. And it's also nice that our bookkeeper, who's on our board, that also handles all of our tuition, also attends. So that's really nice. Last year, I think she's come before, but last year she was introducing herself to families and letting them know if they have any tuition issues, they can come directly to her. So we're working on kind of getting more involvement in that.
Super. How about you, Linda?
Well, we've had several people from the school join the church. So, and I have a new board member who's also a parent, but I have her on as a church member.
Okay.
And then I have another church member who actually volunteers as our literacy coach twice a week.
Nice.
And so she's always, you know, into what's happening here at Chapel School. Her daughter came here 25 years ago, and she's been one of our biggest allies ever since. And then we have a new church member who just joined our board, and she's very interested in what's going on here during the week. So she's been to chapel once. We always invite church members to come to chapel time. So she's been once, and she says she wants to make it a regular thing, coming at least once a month to chapel time. So that's
nice.
That's nice.
Okay, good. Well, and maybe just, you know, keep the creative juices flowing as you think about other ways that you can suggest and ask. Sometimes it needs a specific ask for board members to participate. And celebrating is a huge big piece of that. There's always a lot of opportunities to celebrate when a school year goes well, and encouraging and engaging those board members to be part of that. Boards can get caught up the negative side of helping to run the school or center. It's important to remember that there'll be many good things that happen and occur. So good time to celebrate together. And I kind of like parties. I think Corey and Linda know me well enough to know that's probably a true statement. And so I love celebrations. I love parties. And sometimes you'll get a board member who doesn't seem particularly engaged, but if you ask them to put together a party to, celebrate the staff at the end of the year or whatever, they might be very willing to, a lot of times people love to put together events. They just need a reason to do that. So I know we are out of time. I've gone a little bit over. Any specific questions I can try to address before we wrap up? Well, I hope this was a helpful discussion. There's no magic answers on boards, but I think that it's the training them, the working on collaboration, helping them understand that they're part of a team, trying to get them engaged. And I know it goes both ways. As an administrator, you feel they should be there encouraging and supporting you, and they should be. But we all know that you have the day-to-day hands-on work. And so it often becomes your responsibility to invite them in and get a little more out of them. So with that, Corey, anything else from me? Otherwise, I can stop sharing and I can get off and let you finish.
Yeah, thank you, Gayle. I want to just
You're
add
welcome.
transparency and communication. I can't say it enough when I'm talking to school and church leaders about any type of leadership in their school with their board. The better the communication and the more transparent those conversations are, the better resolve that happens. There's so much that we see when problems arise. It's, well, we've had all these conversations and then the board told the administrator this. Well, now the administrator doesn't know where any of that information came from, so really pulling people into the conversation at the earliest possible time and making sure that those conversations are really transparent. And it just leads to much better understanding. So thank you so much for all of, all of what you shared today and your leadership. And we always appreciate you being here with us. And to tag along with one of the just most recent things Gayle was saying was, talking about how to get your board engaged. So one way of getting your board engaged is tasking them with a project that is going to really have a positive impact on your church and your school together. And so I have brought in Kat Cecier. She's with Jaffe Emergency Services, because Jaffe Emergency Services and the ELEA have collaborated and made available a 5-part module, training module with templates and information on working together as church and school for school safety and emergency preparedness. So Kat is here to kind of walk you through the toolkit that we've put together, and I'll tell you more about where to access that toolkit. And there is some information available that you can utilize to kind of onboard or share with your board so that they kind of understand what this undertaking might be. But it would be a great way to hopefully gain some more engagement in something that your board would be able to kind of direct and lead, but it has a direct positive impact to the people who attend your church, the people who attend your school, and the families involved. So Kat, thank you so much. I'm going to let you come on screen here, and I'm going to figure out how to share my screen while you're talking, and then we'll go through this.
And in the meantime, I will just say goodbye and thank you for having me. And there are a couple of documents from nonprofit board questionnaires and templates that I didn't have time to share with you, but Corey will tell you where you can find those if you're interested. And in the meantime, thank you. It was good to see everybody. Bye-bye.
Hi, Gayle. Love you.
Bye. Bye.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for letting me join today. My name is Kat Cecier, as Corey said, and me and members of my team, safety consultants, and our online learning platform manager have been working really closely with Corey because Corey had approached us and said we would love to have some templates that are personalized and videos that are personalized for our schools that cover an umbrella of topics being proactive for safety and security. So that's what we do. We work with schools and venues and events all across the country. I manage our team of safety consultants. And so as you can imagine, right, as you all want to, the majority of our work, we want to be proactive. Let's come and see the schools. Let's have meaningful safety plans. Let's put as much as we can in place because we all know by definition, we can't plan for when an emergency or crisis or incident is going to happen. And so we want to be able to be prepared in advance. And then of course, we're here to support you reactively as needed. But what Corey is sharing on the screen is a summary of the 5 modules. And so faculty, and just to cover the 5 topics really broadly for you, faculty and staff crisis response, best practices for co-located schools, safety committees, and advanced planning. Sounds like maybe board and safety committees can overlap a little bit if that's what your teams are just talking about. Crisis communication planning, functional exercise drills, and introduction to an emergency operations plan. So what we put together for you is an overview and a video introduction of each module, but then provided you with templates, one-pagers, resources for you to use at your school to make sure you have the most meaningful plans in place. And so we wanted to give you all of those starting points, and then the videos are meant to be a little bit of guidance on the best way to use those. So the one that's being shared right now about the co-located schools, right? We have been working more and more we work with schools of all shapes and sizes, all types of schools, but more and more schools co-located with different houses of worship, and in this case, churches. And as you all know, there are some complexities that can come with that. And so we tried to outline some of those for you and how to work really meaningfully hand in hand with the church leadership and school leadership to plan for the safest, most joyful school days, church services, and then any events happening on campus. So this is just an example of what one of the 5 modules looks like, right? The overview, this actually has a 2-part video, and then certainly the resources for you. So we've so enjoyed working with Corey, right? We all put a lot of time into this and so value your feedback on if these tools feel useful for you throughout the rest of the year and then as you go into planning for next year. Corey, anything I forgot to overview from our work together?
No, I think this is great. And I'm just going to kind of click through. So for those of you who are members, you'll find this in the Member Information Center after you log in. On the left-hand side, you'll find ELEA resources, and then you'll click there and you'll find all these infographics, and you'll be able to click on all the links and get access to all the resources. On the regular website, you'll find just that first slide that I showed you, which is the introduction, and kind of that's available to everybody to kind of see, you know, what the modules are like, what's included. So I just kind of wanted to take you through these slides so that you could see what each part is made up of, but there's so much packed into each of the modules, and we're just really excited to make this available. I think, you know, one of the things that really made me want to jump into this is first of all, I listened to Chris Jaffe speak at a Cape board meeting over a year ago, and he took us through the Uvalde tragedy, kind of a second by second, showing us what was happening. And it just was so incredibly impactful to listen to him. And there, you know, were gaps in time. And, you know, what we want to have happen is for people to just know exactly what they need to do at every moment during any sort of emergency. And then recently, one of our schools, who's going through a lot of turmoil, had a very tension-packed board meeting, church council meeting. Things got out of hand. It went 3 hours. It got a little bit out of control. The pastor shut it down. The next morning, a phone call was made to the church office, and there were some threats against the school made. And the church administrator assumed that that came out of just angry parents from the night before, angry community members from the night before. And she did nothing with that information for quite a while until sharing it just with another person. And so as I'm sure those of you here can understand, that church administrator was let go. Those are not protocols that are acceptable with any sort of licensing. If any time there's a threat made, that threat has to be taken seriously until an official would be, to indicate that the threat is unfounded or unwarranted or has been neutralized. And so it's just so important that every church and school work together on emergency preparedness, and everybody knows what the other hand is going to do if something happens. As simple as, an electrical outage or a fire, in one part of the building, or for our schools and centers that have separate buildings, if something happens in one location, what is everybody else doing to make sure that the entire grounds are safe? So we hope that these training modules will just be one piece of that. And Jaffe has so many more resources available and consultations available, but this is just a little nugget that we can utilize to really bring our schools and centers into best practice with emergency preparedness and safety. Does anybody have any questions about any of those pieces?
I don't have a question. I just want to say it looks great. I already pulled it up on your website, and yeah, that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really valuable resource. So I'll be excited to hear, how it goes for you. I've leaned on Kat and her team extensively. They've done this before. I think it's going to be seamless and easy. But I'd love to hear back, any feedback that you have, or if there were pieces that felt out of sync, or even pieces that you felt, we need one more little nugget, maybe something said something, or a resource mentioned something, and you say, I can't find this little nugget. Can we get access to it? So.
Yeah, always happy. Also, what the consultants do, right? If you feel that this is something we can help even more with, sort of hand in hand, arm in arm, to build out a plan or run a meaningful drill, we would love to connect individually at a campus level, school and church, to take these resources and best practices and really, really personalize it for you and your community. So always happy to be that resource as well.
Thank you so much, Kat. And thank you for being here. I appreciate it. Any other, Shannon, Linda, any other questions about Gayle's presentation or the resources available, or anything else that, and Melanie's here too. She's just quietly in the background, that we can help you with or support you in?
Not that I can think of. I've appreciated the time and the information.
Great.
Yes, and I will see you in New Orleans.
Yay. Yeah, that's next week. That's so crazy.
Right?
Yeah, I'm going to be ready.
Yeah, that's what I keep telling myself.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here, Linda. I will see you next week. And I appreciate all that you all do.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Nice to meet you all. Thanks.
Thank you.